Okay, it's 7 o'clock. We'll call the meeting to order. And we'll start by taking roll call. I'll just call your name, and if you're here, just let me know. Katie?
Yeah.
And Andrew E. is not here. And I don't know yet. Okay. I'm here. Nicholas Lee, not here. David Liu, not here. Tim Motley had called in an excuse. Excuse absence. Brenda.
Here.
Zach is online.
There.
Marlene. Brad online.
Here. I'm here.
Andrew Myers. And then Ryan Olson. Here. So with the 4, we would need to have, we don't have any actions for tonight anyway.
I was going to say, there's no action.
There's no action tonight, but if we do, we would need both Brad and Ryan to step in.
We've got someone else joining us right now. Cool. David.
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 Here.
Perfect. Okay. And then next thing is approval of minutes. Did everybody get a chance to review the minutes? Any exceptions or corrections to be noted? I don't have, I gotta go over to check the screen. And I don't have any myself, so with that, I'll approve the minutes. Next item is public comments. I don't know that we have anybody here, but we did receive a comment via email. And Santi, I think, will in the record that way. Is that how we handle that?
Yeah, it'll get added into the minute.
And it was from Connie about the Heritage Tree Program, correct?
Correct.
Okay, we're moving along nice and quickly. So regular business items, we'll start. Jeff will lead us through. There's three items to discuss tonight, and he'll MC those.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Good evening, everyone. Just a chance to introduce staff and the teams in these 3 items. I thought it'd be really easy to cover all 3 of these, but rather repeating it 3 times, I guess I'll just state it once. Tonight really represents a lot of broad policy discussion with these 3 items. Really important topics. All will be coming back to you. We're not looking to take action tonight on these. So really want to invite you into this initial work that's been done by some of the ad hoc groups, and invite your thoughts, your questions, your feedback tonight. There's no bad questions. There's no bad feedback. All of this feedback is really going to help staff inform and really shape the work that's going to be coming back to you from goals and policies with the park plan that are on schedule to come back to you in November, to Dan in not only the urban forest management plan, but also the Heritage Tree Program coming back to you as that work really starts to take shape. So really invite and welcome and encourage your feedback tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to Dan, who will introduce the urban forest management plan.
Thank you, Jeff. Once again, I'm Dan Hintz. I'm the Urban Forest Supervisor within Parks and Community Services. I think I met most of you when I started about 6 or 7 months ago. I came here and did just kind of a brief introduction to a little bit of my background and role, and really excited to be back here and actually having some more tangible updates. And as Jeff mentioned, these are both topics that we will be bringing back to you in 2024 as well. So really excited to get some kind of initial feedback discussion going here tonight. But know that there'll be more touch points on both the Urban Forest Management Plan and the Heritage Tree Program. So we're going to start with the Urban Forest Management Plan. I think hopefully most of you know this is going to be the City of Issaquah's first comprehensive forest management plan. We had, it's worth a little clap there. We had an urban forest tree canopy assessment done in 2017, 2018, and that really set the stage for building out our urban forest program, and now looking at, decade, 2 decades down the line, how we can really set ambitious goals and strategies for the management and care of our urban trees and forests. So We estimate we have about 200 or 250,000 trees, which is within our 12 or 13 square miles. So, you know, it's a mix of obviously private and public land, 51% tree canopy, all things we're looking to build on, you know, take care of the existing trees we have and really find strategic ways that we can meet our 55% canopy goal set forth in our climate action plan, our Issaquah climate action plan. So hopefully that just sets the stage a little bit. I'm excited to introduce a couple of our consultants from Planet Geo. So Andrea will be leading most of this first presentation. I'll hand it off to her in a second. Andrea Starbird. I believe we do have Chris Heifer. Hopefully I have Chris's last name right on Teams as well. So Chris might be putting his camera on to give us a wave. So hi Chris. So we were really excited to work with Planet Geo. We had a request for qualifications out this summer and officially got them on board in August. So we're just a couple months into this process. We'll kind of talk about time frame, scope, and hopefully get you to learn a little bit more about Planet Geo and some of the kind of technical expertise they bring to this work, which we're really, really excited about. So I guess I have do this on my own. So I'll just kind of go over the quick agenda for this presentation and then hand it off to Andrea here. Let's just be a little bit of a background, which I tried to tee up there a little bit, kind of the approach to the plan here. And then we want to leave, 10 minutes or so on this agenda item for any questions, comments you all might have as we are really starting to shape the kind of form and content and, kind of what to really focus on and prioritize in this plan. So, yeah, that's kind of what we have going here. Andrea, you want to take over?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Starbird. All right, I'm gonna click through this a little bit. I'm one of the urban forestry consultants with Planet Geo. I am local, which is great. I'm very excited to be working on the Issaquah Urban Forest Management Plan. As Dan mentioned, we're hoping to kind of build on the already pretty impressive urban forest that Issaquah has, and Planet Geo has already partnered with the city of Issaquah on previous projects. So we're excited to be here again. A little bit of background about us is we like to call it our urban forestry hub. We like to support municipalities that we work with from start to finish, whether that's inventory, using our tree plotter software, or writing master plans, pest and disease management plans, etc. Part of my background and the reason I joined Planet Geo is because I have worked with 15 plus municipalities in the region. So I have a really strong understanding of how the city code gets implemented on the ground and how arborists and consultants interpret those things. So hoping to bring that experience to the plan here. Part of what we always ask is, why do we want to have an urban forest management plan? So we always like to bring this quote at the beginning of a meeting. I'll read it. Urban trees and forests are considered integral to the sustainability of cities as a whole, yet sustainable urban forests are not born, they are made. They do not arise at random, but result from a community-wide commitment to their creation and management. So that's part of what we're doing here, is hoping to get that community-wide commitment, set the city of Issaquah up for a sustainable, actionable management plan for the city of trees. Many of you likely know, being that you're on the Parks Board here, that urban forests provide many benefits to our communities. We need trees close to where we live, not only in the parks, but parks are usually one of the first things that our community members think of when they think of trees. So in addition to clean air, cleaning the air and reducing pollution, and a really important part of the city of Issaquah from a local but not Issaquah resident is the wildlife here. So we're really excited to kind of bring all of these benefits to the master plan and tailor it to the city of Issaquah in particular. I'm sure some of you are already dealing with a lot of the impacts of climate change that we're experiencing here already. Our western red cedar dieback is becoming really noticeable around the region. We know that emerald ash borer was just identified in Oregon not that long ago. So what does it look like for us planning appropriately? The salmon habitat here I know is really important in our local watersheds and how our urban forests are impacting those. So here are just some other potential risks and challenges that we know are facing the city, but are also facing our region as a whole. A little bit background on the project team. Chris is here on Teams. He's our project manager. He is the director of our team. He has an unbelievable amount of experience. He just hit 9 years with Planet Geo. Alex he's our fearless leader. Alex is not able to be here tonight, but she's an urban planner, also an ISA certified arborist. She's going to be leading a lot of the policy and management recommendations, as well as the analysis of kind of what already exists. I'll be supporting in that. And then my role, as it says there, is engagement and research. Part of the local subject matter expert falls in my realm. I understand the forests here, the tree species here, the things that are impacting us. And then we started working together, Dan and I already, on our internal staff engagement, which is part of our overall scope of services. You can see high level here just what our management plan entails. These task categories are really just, again, high level. If anybody is interested in seeing our full scope, I'm happy to share that after this meeting. That goes through kind of what each of these tasks entails. As far as our overall approach, the main themes we're looking at here is, okay, what do we have? What do we want? How do we get there? And how are we doing? So we're looking through everything that exists in Issaquah with the city management of trees, with how trees are regulated on private property and public property, looking through codes, what the permit process is, how many city employees are touching trees from, point A to hopefully planting to eventual removal, but management the entire time. As I mentioned, we're already working on the staff consultations. These are all kind of concurrent efforts that occur. They're not necessarily linear. This is an iterative planning process, so we will be, if we need to go back and look at something else, these are all informing the next stages. We are working on our community engagement plan, which these staff consultations will be informing. And then in September 2024 is when we're looking at final delivery of the plan itself. This is a little bit just a deeper look at what our engagement process summary looks like. Part of our scope of work is going to include, I think, 3 public meetings. We are looking at integrating those to other existing meetings so that we're not dealing with engagement fatigue. We want people to be excited about talking about trees, not annoyed that we keep asking them questions. 2 public messaging campaigns and support for a YouTube video or otherwise to kind of raise awareness about the project in general. So our next steps, like I mentioned, that internal staff survey is currently underway. It wraps up at the end of this month. That will inform our outreach plan, and we are working with the City of Issaquah communications staff to kind of finalize the timeline for that. Brings me to any questions. We'd like to open it up, and I don't know where we're at. But...
We're pretty good at time.
Okay.
We'll have to start too.
Great.
I'm just curious, what is causing the problem with the red cedar?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I actually recently went to a talk about this. There are some researchers and plant pathologists who are looking into it, and we are not positive. We're still in a data collection phase. We can't. There are some theories that say it's possibly based on soil type, soil depth, and whether or not so Western red cedars are very sensitive to hydrology changes. So any moisture change that's dramatic can cause decline. But we're also looking at things like, is there construction impacts? Has the humidity level in the air changed enough that it's actually impacting how the trees are interacting with their environment? There's a wide range of possibilities, and I'm sad to say I don't have a firm answer yet.
Brenda, we are working with a group called Forest Health Network, and right now they're trying to really map the extent and kind of location so they can kind of keep diving into some of these hypotheses, too. So that's been something that's been kind of neat, and we've actually kind of done a couple of hikes with as well, Trails Club on Tradition Plateau, Cougar Mountain, up in the Highlands, where we are seeing that red cedar dieback, and at least trying to get it documented and have kind of the scale there here locally and then regionally as well. So.
Is Forrest
Okay,
managing?
yeah.
Oh,
Brad, thank you.
Thanks for all that. You know, I don't know regarding the cedar dieback. I've got some of it going on in my property here, so I'll be curious to hear not only what it is, but if there's anything that can be done about it. I think it may be one of those kind of things we might determine that there's some ecological changes or whatever, but there may not be much that we can do about it. So it'd be interesting to hear on that. You know, I'm curious to know from Andrea, perhaps. I know you're just kind of getting started on it, but what do you actually see as being unique to Issaquah as compared to some of the other cities that you work with?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Thank you. Well, one of the things that's really on my mind right now is Washington State's new building code. Issaquah has a lot of what is mapped as the wildland urban interface. So how the building code is going to interact with tree preservation efforts and any requirements that might be required as part of new development. There's usually distances required where there can be no trees. That is regulation that is based on usually like large subdivision developments, usually not so much in an urban area, but that's being applied really broadly across the entire state and in many other states. So I think Issaquah is really unique in that, looking at how to kind of mesh those two sort of seemingly incongruent policies together to make sure that we still have a really livable community. The other aspect that I'm excited about Issaquah is just the wildlife component. I think Issaquah is very unique in the extent of wildlife that is here, especially kind of right outside of Seattle. A lot of our cities are becoming a lot more urbanized, and it's really pushing the wildlife out. But in the process working with Dan, we know that that's a priority, is looking at these wildlife corridors. So I think that's something else that Issaquah really has an opportunity to lead in, especially in our region. And those are the top two that come to mind for me right now.
Thank you.
Would add on the wildlife front, something I'm really excited about with this plan, and I know Brad, that question was directed to Andrea, but I'll chime in here anyway. Obviously, being such a salmon city, we are doing a specific riparian canopy analysis as part of this plan too. So we'll have updated canopy numbers to compare back to, I believe, the 2017 data, which we have been using that 51% number for several years now. But then we will have a specific subset, which we didn't have before, looking at riparian cover, which obviously so much literature out there, connecting that to salmon habitat and health of our streams. So that's something I'm really excited about too, that's in the scope and actually ties into some benefits with our public works stormwater or NPDES permits, as they're going to start requiring some tree retention, tree canopy goals, and specifically around riparian areas. So I think it sets us up really well in a couple different avenues, obviously with the goal of increasing riparian wildlife habitat for salmon, and then also some requirements that might be coming from Department of Ecology for stormwater permits. So kind of neat, kind of multiple benefits there of that part of the scope too.
Just a question that maybe it's like, just when you say 51% is the, well, we're at 55% is the goal, just from my understanding what that means. Does that mean if you were to take a snapshot of all of Issaquah, 51% is currently covered by leaves, tree covers?
Tree canopy, and Andrea or Chris could probably speak a little bit better to how it's calculated, and there's small discrepancies, leaf off's a tough time of year to do it for our deciduous trees. But yeah, essentially you're kind of looking at that bird's eye view at our 12 or 13 square miles, and pretty confidently say we're at 51% with a small margin of error there. But I don't know if Andrea or Chris, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I know that Chris was more involved with that project. I am fairly new to Planet Geo, but that was based on the 2017 data. Chris, if you want to add to how that's calculated, that is something that I actually don't have experience in working with, that overall canopy assessment part. That's something that Chris and Alex would be supporting this project in.
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to keep it simple. It's a 2D look top down at canopy cover. So canopy takes priority over other land cover classes. There are others like bare soil, grass, impervious, like your buildings or your paved areas. And what you have then is the amount of cover in terms of acres in proportion to the city total land area. And we look at land area, not total area, because land area excludes water, and then that gives us what's really potentially feasible for canopy. So again, top-down view, acreage, and then percentage is how much of that acreage is canopy in comparison to the city's land area.
Okay, follow-up question. Sorry, this is all kind of new to me. So to get from 51 to 55 at a very like 30,000 level, is it just plant more trees and have less things?
I mean, planting trees is a big component, but also maintaining and, doing our best to extend the lifetime of our existing trees. And, a big strategy that we'll be looking to extent is, tree succession planting. That tree canopy assessment already looked at the potential planting area. PPA, I believe, is the acronym that we use in that report. To try to identify areas where there is that potential public land, there's, kind of the conditions that wouldn't be conflicting with a lot of other development infrastructure, as Andrew is kind of mentioning there. So obviously to increase, we need to plant more trees, but also we don't want to go backwards. I mean, I think City of Seattle just saw that their canopy actually decreased 1% or 2% recently when they were trying to move to 30% from, I think, 23 or 24. So, I mean, there's kind of both sides of it. It's both the kind of management, conservation of existing trees, and finding where we can establish new canopy.
Can I ask one weird follow-up? So let's say I have a 100 foot by 100 square foot park. So we have a playground and a ball field. If I put up a tree that goes 10 by 10, have I now covered 10% of the area? That literally how the math works on that?
Yeah, 100 square feet out of 1,000 square feet.
Okay.
I believe so, yes.
So like if you're building stuff, the idea is if you have something that's not covered, you're plopping a tree here, a tree there, and you're reducing the footprint of the actual thing being built with more, like you're squeezing the canopy number. Maybe not, it's not at the 55 when you're building something, but by adding something. I got it. Okay.
That's that's where we're trying to figure out where appropriate to plant trees. And we're seeing a lot of these issues. And I've been working with Public Works, and Andrew has a really strong background with this, where we're having a lot of sidewalk infrastructure issues because of tree roots. And obviously, we want to keep trees in our right of ways for both aesthetic, stormwater benefits they provide, and how we kind of balance, as you said, those kind of incongruous or kind of competing needs there at times. So yeah, you can certainly have canopy and other functioning elements underneath too. And then obviously we have some of our bigger, more contiguous forested areas too. So we're definitely looking at all these different, micro forests or even individual trees to Tradition Plateau, where we have 400 acres of forest or so. But
yeah, if I can just add something really fast, having been here when we did that tree canopy, so really good questions, Ryan. And I think just to reiterate in fact, we should get copies of that tree canopy study so you all sort of have that as well. It's really good information. The recommendations really try and get strategic, right? And understanding to find that 4% and knowing that the forest is not static. It's a living, breathing, literally entity, right? We have dieback that's happening, right? I mean, that's why this urban forest management plan is so important. Is the 51% is not guaranteed, right? So how are we best stewarding that? And then strategically, where are we finding those areas where we can do planting in a way that isn't, well, we have to take something away. It's, hey, there are areas within our landmass that, in fact, for example, Central Issaquah, where we're planning a big amount of future density, is probably the least treed area. So even as that development is happening, how do we encourage additional trees planted, right tree, right place, to try and find those additional percentages. So even in the conversations we were having back then, we are a deficit in a number of things. Even within our park system, we're a deficit of active recreation spaces. This conversation of trees and the importance of preserving our forest is not a discussion of one or the other. It really is a discussion of both. We've got a community that's wanting both. And so all of this important strategic work really plays really well together. And to know that we're not only doing our first urban forest management plan, but updating our park system plan at the same time. I think there's some real advantages that we're trying to think strategically on both of those community needs and desires.
Yeah. I know you kind of said this on your intro, that you thought, Issaquah is unique in that we are so close to a very dense zone like Seattle. And, you're a 15-minute drive out and we got 51% coverage. How does that goal of 55 and the current 51 compare to some of the other areas around here? I saw you in your presentation in Renton and other places, but like, is 51 like already a lot for an area?
I would say compared to Seattle, absolutely. Part of our canopy goal setting is looking at what's appropriate for the city itself, and part of that process is benchmarking. So we're looking at how Issaquah compares to other regional cities. And Chris, if you want to chime in, feel free. But when we're looking at that, we're looking at, okay, what does the city have? How does it align with the city's goals with maintaining or expanding sort of the sense of place that Issaquah has? So for a city like Issaquah, 51 to 55% is a really reasonable goal. It was, determined that was attainable based on the available planting space, which I think the only thing I would add to that conversation is that we do take into consideration current land use and future land use in terms of like, we are not looking at ball fields, for example, or recreation play fields as suitable planting space. We're not looking at impervious surface as suitable planting space. We really want trees that are installed in the ground to actually make it and then not take away from other services that parks and public places are providing. 55 is probably on the high side for the Puget Sound region in general. But given that Issaquah has so many parks and such a large amount of forested area, it does seem appropriate for the city. That's pretty awesome to strive for.
And that number wasn't necessarily a number created by the consultant team. That was a number that the Development Commission and the City Council adopted as the aspirational target and goal.
Katie has one and Brad has a question.
So can I just ask a question? So in terms of this strategic plan that we have here, will then the city take a look at that and then base their decision on granting like permits for buildings and private developers? Because my question is that that if that's the case, that would be great, because about a few years ago in Tallis there was a massive tree destruction on just like one November evening, and then in the landslide. And as of right now, it is still sitting there with nothing. So my question is that with this strategic plan, the city will be looking at that and take into consideration providing permits to say, no, you're not gonna, destroy hundreds of trees, on a rainy season. Will that?
Yeah, I will say one of my introductions to urban forest management in the city of Issaquah was the Tallis project, seeing kind of what was happening there.
Yeah.
Part of our approach is that we are making recommendations. So we can't guarantee that they'll be implemented, but part of the plan is that we do make recommendations for how development should be managed in particular and how that gets balanced with the development needs of the city. So my background is actually tree management during development. So looking at industry best practices, how are we encouraging developers to actually retain trees where possible? What does that kind of process look like? How are we determining what is a tree that's going to make it through development? Where is it more appropriate to remove and replace trees? And how does that balance with density requirements? And that can change based on different parts of the city, but that will be part of our overall recommendations. And then as part of the planning process, we will develop draft recommendations, and then those get reviewed with the project team and any stakeholders that Dan helps identify. So we'll be looking for feedback on those also.
So that would be a touch point. We would come back to the board and kind of that draft stage, which would likely be spring-ish.
I think spring, yeah, I want to say our first draft is targeted for March. I believe it might be
So
February.
will the city be like, they were retroactive, like looking at your recommendations and then go back to like all the existing permits that they have provided? Or would they just kind of like, that would be grandfathered in?
So typically, projects that are already existing will be grandfathered. That's not true everywhere, but it is true in many municipalities. I guess I can't speak for how that works here, but usually pending permits are reviewed under the code that they were submitted.
Yeah, one thing also to clarify, Katie, really fast, great questions. So an urban forest management plan, a strategic plan like that does not change city code. It makes recommendations to say, hey, the city should consider, right, reviewing its city code to better protect this. And it would take a separate action by a number of other, right, by, community planning and development department and sort of those other perspectives to then take to city council to modify the development code. And that's how a permitting process would be
The
changed.
tricky part is that because Issaquah, we have private land, but we also, we're like integrated with each other, like it's Talus is within Cougar Mountain. And so the boundaries and the trees and, the wildlife, yes, it's private land, but we're all connected. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if they get rid of those trees, yes, it's private land, but we're all part of the Cougar Mountain. So
You're right, yeah, there
it's
is this.
affecting, so when a landslide, it's not just affecting that private land, so that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that's important for municipalities that we work with is talking about how private land and trees growing on private land really is oftentimes the largest percentage of a urban canopy cover to begin with. And all of that is really intertwined. So part of our process is engaging the community and looking at like, okay, well, what are your feelings and opinions on managing trees differently on private property? And what does it look like when there is development? And what does it look like when there isn't development proposed? Because those small parcel level decisions definitely impact the urban forest as a whole, and that has kind of sweeping, possibly very, very broad impacts. So that is something that we always like to bring up, and then it does depend on the municipality, and as come up is that the city then has to take actions to implement any recommendations.
And another really important, when we think about the urban forest, is really recognizing there's forest on public land and there's forest on private land. We think of it in terms of controlling the controllables. Forest on public land, we have far more ability to manage and maintain trees or part of our urban forest that's on private property, we can influence, but our degree of control or decision-making is vastly different.
Brad has it.
Yeah, Brad, you've been patiently waiting.
Hey, no problem. I'm taking it all in. So my question now is kind of two-pronged, and it all relates to sustainability, which is key for the future here. And my first question is, when you refer to the tree canopy back in 2017, I assume that you're talking about the work that Forterra did back at that point. I think I know the answer to this, but I'll just put this out there. When tree canopy is assessed at 51% or whatever, is there ever any distinction as to the percentage of different species of trees that is actually within that canopy? And if there is, I don't think there is, but if there is, can some more current comparisons be made to actually see if certain trees are sustained or not? And I guess my last question related to that is, as a part of this recommendation, given in light of climate change and all of that, are there going to be some potential recommendations made as to the type of species that actually should be planted in the future? For instance, cedar dieback might be related to climate change. We don't know just yet, but if it is, that's going to be a rather substantial loss in our forests. And if cedars are no longer something that are sustainable, are there going to be some recommendations as to some other potential species that could be more sustainable in the future? So I hope that makes sense. Thanks.
Take the first part maybe, and then sure, at least the Forterra question.
Absolutely.
So Brad, very good question. Two different approaches actually. So the urban tree canopy assessment that Planet Geo led really did just look at overall canopy, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, was not really looking at species composition. Chris just gave us a thumbs up. Forterra worked on our Green Issaquah implementation plan in, Jeff, 2019, 2020-ish.
Yeah, about that time.
And that plan, so the tree canopy is looking across our, like I said, 12 or 13 square miles of incorporated Issaquah. And the Forterra Green Issaquah implementation plan is specifically looking at forested parks and open spaces on public land. So kind of getting back to our last conversation. So that actually did not look at canopy cover. They use a kind of matrix looking at threats to the forest, which generally they're looking at as invasive species, invasive plant species primarily, and then, kind of quality of the forest. So intact canopy, mature canopy, and, kind of finding that middle spot where we're going to preserve the really healthy forest. And, maybe it's not worth the bang for your buck to try to restore the really, really degraded kind of lacking areas. So we're kind of often working in that sweet spot. And they really did that on a management unit across about 1,500 acres of our park system. And there's some really neat research there on, or not research, or data there on tree composition, species composition, as it relates to trees, not as much on the understory species, but that report. So those are two of our really great existing reports, is Planet Geo's Urban Tree Canopy Assessment and Forterra's Green Issaquah 20-year implementation plan. And that plan sets a lot of goals for our, volunteerism, developing forest stewards, and, other kind of maintenance targets of our forested areas. So hopefully that clarifies that part of your question. And then in terms of, kind of species selection, climate, kind of the moving target there, I'd be happy to speak to that a little bit too, but maybe I'll hand it off to Andrea for now, or.
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. Brad, I think that's a really important question. So part of our overall analysis is looking at, what are the native species here? How are they holding up to climate change? That's something that I would like to think that I can influence in this plan in particular. Kind of regarding the Western red cedar dieback in particular, as part of, so we do an analysis called like a sister city analysis, where we start to identify different tree species that might be suitable for what we expect the changes to look like here in a set period of time, out into the future, kind of forecasting what that might look like. Western red cedar is such an important tree here culturally, that I know that some of the local researchers are looking at using different seed banks for Western red cedar. So using plant stock from areas that are further south. So we're just moving the range up rather than trying to replace the tree as a species, or stop planting it, because it doesn't necessarily feel like a totally feasible approach given the significance of Western red cedars here. And we are hopeful that, those studies kind of moving some of the lower, more southern range up to Issaquah and kind of just the northern Puget Sound region in general will be successful. But then also looking at other trees, not recommending that we're planting ash trees anymore, given emerald ash borer, looking at other sort of Mediterranean oak borer, something else that's probably not long until it gets here, that is starting to impact the Portland area. Oregon white oak is something that, I as a local consultant had been recommending planting here because it is a more climate resilient species, but now that we have another invasive pest, that doesn't necessarily set that tree species up for a good long-term survival rate here. So we are kind of looking through all of those different aspects. We will provide recommended species and then kind of caveats that might apply to each of them. And again, that's something that we would bring as part of the draft recommendations and then get some feedback on and go from there.
If I could add, that was awesome. Thank you, Andrea. If I could add one more thing to that, Brad, to mention, one thing we are missing as a city that I think is a goal that we will, put as a recommendation in this plan for sure too, is a tree inventory. And that's not going to be all 200 or so 1,000 trees on both public and private, Forterra has some nice composition mixes where you might be able to look at, a bigger tract of land like Tradition Plateau and see what a species composition, but maybe not be, identifying, measuring, mapping every single tree. But as we talk about street trees, maintained park areas, that is a goal, essentially kind of know like what percentage of our canopy is oak or ash or elm. We're still dealing with little Dutch elm disease in Issaquah as well. So that is something that this plan will hopefully set, really good kind of justification rationale for that need. And I would say that would be kind of the next big push, probably a few years down the line to really collect that data too and have that publicly available. There's some great examples for City of Seattle and some of the other big cities in our region where you can actually look and walk around and see every different species, within public right of ways and parks, which is really cool. So that's probably the next big kind of need for our urban forest program after this plan.
Thank you both for all that.
So you're gathering a lot of data and mapping data and so forth. How are you, or are you going to present it somewhere that's accessible by the public? Will it be like incorporated into the city GIS viewer or something like that?
That's a really good question. I mean, ultimately, a tree inventory, yes, we would love to have that publicly accessible. That is a much smaller subset, ties in a little bit to our next topic on heritage tree programs and kind of some needs and maybe kind of more realistic short-term possibilities to have that publicly, a little bit more publicly accessible in terms of mapping. But yeah, Andrew, do you have any kind of, or Chris, any kind of thoughts on how, these plans, other than people reading through the whole, kind of just knowing that, some folks might need, and we talked about the YouTube promotional video, kind of other thoughts on how making this more digestible to the general public and people that might not read every single section of a plan like this? Or?
Yeah, I think so. Right now, part of the overall scope is, looking at the community engagement. So that's more on the earlier phases. So when we're actually developing the plan and the draft itself before final delivery, we do have a few social media campaigns that we are planning, a few in-person meetings. There will be presentations to City Council and more presentations here if you'll have us back, going through that. So presenting things that are hopefully accessible that way, but then also part of our management plan will have recommendations on how to continue engaging in the future. So what might be appropriate, what that looks like. It's not part of our scope for this plan, but other cities. So we helped the city of Tacoma put together a really robust website. That was something that, was a kind of central touch point for residents there, kind of looking at like, okay, where's the plan? 2 years down the line, what is that? Have we hit these benchmarks? Are we kind of off track here? So that can be one tool. Chris is more familiar with kind of other recommendations that have been put forward for other municipalities we've worked with, but Dan, is there something you want to add?
No, that's great. I'd say City of Sammamish is a few years ahead. I was just talking to some of their staff. They actually are working on essentially an implementation audit now that they're 2 to 3 years in, as Andrew was kind of mentioning. So there are examples of that too. And that's not something we have said in part of this scope with Planet Geo, but that could be a possible way to make sure we are actually using this plan as a tool to move forward the management of our forest in a more sustainable way. But
we have you have a map, at least internally to your work, of all the city areas and then all the canopy areas, right? Or you will have that?
There'll be a lot of mapping within this document.
Most of that exists in the urban tree canopy assessment, and that's broken down by certain areas of Issaquah, as Jeff mentioned, kind of downtown, Old Town, some of those areas where it's a little bit lacking. And I would say yes, tree distribution's a big thing too. A lot of our densest canopy is on the perimeters of the cities, as kind of Katie was hinting at there. So yes, a lot of that does exist. Some of the mapping, that's something we're kind of discussing, what that looks like in this update, or if we're doing more of a comprehensive kind of mapping update on some of the tree canopy assessment, potentially kind of after this effort too. So we'll have the numbers for sure. And then, there's still some kind of work we're going through on the kind of mapping visual side, specifically of the tree canopy assessment in this round. That exists in the 2017. I think it was technically a 2018 tree canopy assessment with 2017 data. So yes, and that is something we've talked about with our GIS coordinator too, is what that could look like as a publicly available layer too. So that's something we're chatting through with him. So
that's exactly where I was going. It seems like if we want to show this, put it, a layer on the GIS, and show the 2017 canopy, the 23 or 24 canopy, and then when we audit ourselves, 5 years from now, the next one, and can compare, is it, what's changing?
Yeah.
Just one quick comment before we move on. So kind of going back to what Ryan was saying and Jen has the 55% target. I think what would be good as you're formulating the strategy and the recommendations is don't try to fixate on the 55. Like if it takes, I don't know, 54%, if it takes $1.5 million to get to 54%, but another $3 million to get to 55%, we wouldn't want to do that, right? Or don't be afraid to recommend, hey, if we spend a little extra money, we can get to 60% if we do this, right? So I think being able to make that sort of a fungible target as opposed to planning everything to 55, that's something I would like to see. So, in terms of like low hanging fruit and dollars, all that other stuff, because there is money involved, right?
That reminded me of another question. So how many trees did you say we have? 200,000?
So our GS coordinator has done like a LiDAR data extraction, 225,000 maybe.
And what was the number that came up, does anybody recall, from our planting last year that we did, like?
We planted this year to date.
20,000 plus.
Okay.
And a big part of it was the lower
They're little,
project.
right.
Some small trees right now, they wouldn't even probably come up in a canopy analysis at this point.
But I mean, so one of the things I think with Title 18, the Title 18 rewrite, they were looking at tree canopy projection. So, if a developer is required to plant this type of tree because in 20 years or whatever the window is, that's the canopy it will have. So are you, in this study, are you also looking at what those 20,000 trees, which is sort of like 10% of all our trees, or another 10%, what does it mean in 20 years or something like that?
I don't believe so.
Not
I
yet.
think that's where the intervals of updated tree canopy assessments are important. And I'll love to ask that, Andrew, if you know, or Chris, kind of what minimum canopy height we were looking at in general in tree canopy assessments. Like a 3-foot sapling is not going to show up as part of our urban tree canopy. But is there sort of a minimum height that's the filter for canopy as we do those studies?
There is, yes, with our Earth Defined partnership, which is a newer partnership. I don't know those numbers offhand, but there's a threshold that's classified for low-lying shrub or tree canopy, depending on height, using the LiDAR or digital elevation models of data that we're able to gather in addition to the aerial imagery for assessments. So just not sure on that what the exact criteria is, though.
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit. So the lowest that I've seen is 8 feet. So that's what the city of Seattle did theirs on, and that was one of the big critiques of that assessment, was that 8 feet is very low because it catches a lot of shrubbery. So something that maybe isn't necessarily considered tree canopy. So I've also seen kind of 15 to 20 feet, and we'd have to double check to see what our Earth Defined partners are looking at. I don't believe it's as low as 8 feet. It's probably closer to that 12 and above. But yeah, we are not catching those little saplings necessarily when we're looking at the canopy data.
It's a really good question, though. And yeah, I think ultimately that is the justification of doing periodic, updates of the tree canopy data every 5 years or so or something like that. But Chris, you're kind of getting me thinking is, I can in my head tell you where it's like, oh, there's about an acre of recent restoration plantings that in 10 years we could project to be in that 10 to 15 to 20 foot height. So it'd be really interesting. It was just kind of doing some of the calculations on, we have about 8,000 acres. If you're talking about 12 square miles, and to get another 4%, we're talking about another 300 or so acres of planted area. Then once again, that takes probably 10 years or so to meet that sort of minimum requirement for canopy height and, kind of young canopy. But we could probably do some interesting kind of calculations on sites that are on track for that. Within our park system, and it's certainly not 300, but it's not insignificant either in terms of some of these planting areas. So
These recent plantings that we start projecting.
or we have planned in the next couple of years. So yeah. Thank you.
Great discussion.
Yeah, thank you for everyone's questions. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So next steps.
Yeah. Take my contact info. Oops. I also have some business cards, but if anybody has any questions, Dan is the primary contact. And he can kind of move any questions to the consulting team as needed. Anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, we will be planning to share essentially an external stakeholder survey, and that will be certainly going to the park board, the environmental board, and, trying to figure out other, public meetings or ways we can get that out. We're kind of working right now with our communications team to find what might be a good window. So that likely is going to be early in the new year. So it'll be another opportunity to solicit information once we've kind of been able to filter through the internal staff survey work we're doing right now. We've already had 20 to 25 responses and have that open for another week from staff. I think we invited about 50 people to participate in that survey. So there'll be a touch point there, which we'd love to share through the board, and then probably come back and kind of review some of that and have some of the draft strategies, recommendations. And I'm guessing we don't have them on the calendar yet, but that would be within the first few months of the new year too. So.
Thank you. And transitioning to trees.
Dan again.
Yeah.
Yes. Great. Well, kind of zooming in to a specific program. Hopefully, most everyone on the park board knows that we have a heritage tree program here in the city of Issaquah. That has been a bit dormant though for a little while, and we'll kind of get into that here in a second. So Santi's getting the slides up there. So really plan on spending the next 10 minutes or so kind of going over, like this is here. What is a heritage tree program, and specifically how has that looked in Issaquah? Very quickly, we can look at a couple of our heritage trees. I love to kind of call it, we've been working with 2 interns from Gibson Eck who have been amazing, actually going out, taking photos, documenting. We really don't have a lot of information on these trees. And as you'll see here in a slide in a second, it's been since 2012 that we've nominated a new tree as a heritage tree. So we can talk briefly about our current tree inventory process as currently set around how heritage trees are nominated and selected, which this board is instrumental in. Potential updated goals for the programs and a few questions for you all to think about are really kind of the last 2 parts. And right now, this is certainly a discussion or questions we can help clarify with the thought that based on your feedback, based on feedback from a little bit already from Brad and Andrew, Connie just sent a comment about this too, that, we'll work internally as a team and essentially provide some recommendations to update this plan. And that, I believe, would be an actual item for the park board, as in our code. The park board is the organization or entity that administers this program. So
Can I add one quick background piece too, Dan? Thank you so much for that. Just as a reminder and some context, and I believe it was late last year and into this year, we brought back the Heritage Tree Program and said, it really is time that this needs a deeper dive and an update and a refresh. And if you recall, at that time, we realized, we're about to bring on board an urban forest supervisor, we're about to kick off an urban forest management plan. Let's get that position, let's get that person on board and going and really get to work on this. So I think the timing is, again, very spot on and very right for this work.
Yeah, so the goal, we kind of gather some feedback, make some recommendations. This will probably come back to the board early in the new year, really with the goal of trying to have some trees nominated in 2024 with, an updated process there. So for people that maybe aren't as familiar, I can go pretty quickly. And once again, I give our interns a ton of credits for all the photos. That's our coastal redwood, I believe, in Gilman Village there, one of our heritage trees near Issaquah Coffee Company. But many cities around the nation, and I'm sure internationally too, have similar programs, really recognizing the significance of some individual trees or occasionally groves of trees. We'll talk about that in a second here too, in the community. Really meant to, and I think these are kind of our goals, to recognize, celebrate, and educate about these unique trees. We'll talk about our existing criteria that, makes trees unique here in Issaquah. This was developed in 2005 by the park board to promote, as I kind of mentioned, identification, kind of the education component there, recognition of trees that reflect the unique character of Issaquah. And as I kind of mentioned, our last tree was nominated in 2012. So we had a pretty steady stream of trees being nominated within those 7 years, and then have haven't since then, so.
And one thing we learned in that 7 years, pretty much every nomination was done by one staff person. So again, it didn't feel like it was resonating with the community. So again, great opportunity to let's again look at this.
We'll have some kind of questions on maybe why that could be, and maybe some better kind of outreach opportunities. And Brad gave a little feedback on that already in terms of the public versus private property locations and nomination process of heritage trees. So current inventory, this does live on our website. It's a pretty simple page. It essentially looks kind of just like a chronological list of species and years and locations. Chris definitely want to get that publicly available on maps, and this is kind of the first step to have an updated inventory with photos. Our interns are out taking diameter of breast height, so measuring the circumference of trees and calculating that into the diameter at about 4 feet above ground level, and then some new photos. So we have 24 recorded heritage trees in Issaquah. There's a few more that were originally on our list that have either fallen over, died, needed to be removed, but 24 living trees that are scattered around, mostly public property, but a few on private property here as well. So just to get kind of an idea of what that looks like, I just have 2 slides. And at the end of this presentation, we have almost the rest of them documented. Our interns have a few more to get put in there, but this is the ginkgo tree, downtown Issaquah, just off of Front Street. And I just learned about this, that it's near Coffee Sutra, if people know where that is. This was originally planted by Issaquah's first mayor, Doc Gibson. So you can pretty legitimately identify this tree as probably at least 100 to 120 years old. I believe he was mayor just around the turn of the century in the early 1900s. Ginkgo trees are very ancient trees, and they can live for a really, really long time. So it's really neat that we have this. This is a female specimen. Ginkgo trees are either male or female. We've sort of learned that the female seeds can have a bit of an odor that's not always desirable. So maybe at the time that wasn't known, but I've actually never experienced that from this tree, but this was the description that was sent in for this when it was nominated as, I believe, our first 2 trees in 2005. So there generally have been forms of, essentially why the tree fits this criterion. We'll get to that in a second, but I actually couldn't find a lot of that data except for a couple of these. But the Doc Gibson thing there is really interesting to me. And then I think most people are familiar with our Douglas fir, probably our biggest tree within city limits, at least in Issaquah, on the Ruth Keys Trail on Tradition Plateau of Tiger Mountain. If you look at the old interpretive sign, it's a little bit out of date. It says it's about 7 feet 9 inch diameter. We just updated that. It actually looks more like 8.5 feet. Once again, this is assumed to be the largest tree within city limits. We don't know that as 100% accuracy, but that's to our best understanding, and estimated to be probably about half a century old. So this was also one of the first trees identified and nominated and accepted in the Heritage Tree Program in 2005. So really trying to capture some just kind of fun facts, both to the species we're talking about and to the individual trees, and a little bit of the history you might be able to uncover there. So like I said, we have a lot more slides that look like this, but those are at the end, and if people are interested, they're in your packet too. So I did send this out, or I believe we talked about sending this out as a PDF. It's just a little 2-page, essentially what our form is. We don't have an electronic version of this, which that would be a very simple thing that we want to update in this to essentially have a form that people can submit. So right now it is printing this out, filling out the descriptions. I know it's a little hard to read on the screen, but essentially looking at the first page is kind of the form you submit, which is the name of the property owner, person nominating the tree, if different from the property owner, the address and contact information. There's not even an option to put email in here, which I found a little funny, but description and location of tree nominated, photograph, characteristics of tree nominated that merit consideration. And then we do have to have a signature from the property owner, essentially giving permission to submit this. And that was, one of Connie's questions in her comment too, is, who is that person with parks or the city potentially on public land too? In the past, I believe that was Alan Haywood, the city's arborist for a long time. He was at least nominating them. He wasn't necessarily deciding whether they would be nominated or not, but he was the one operationally leading that. So kind of talk about those stages there on the right side there is a little kind of summarizing approach to our current setup. And then on the other side of this form actually gets into a little bit of the characteristics we have for our Issaquah Heritage Tree Program. So we essentially have 3 characteristics, And this is in our city code and our Title 18 tree preservation. And as I mentioned, it has the park board as administering this program based on these characteristics and ultimately voting on acceptance or potentially rejecting heritage tree nominations. But really looking at a size or age not normally seen for that species in the Pacific Northwest. So obviously Douglas firs are big trees. So we're not going to nominate every Douglas fir that's 2 feet diameter, even though it's bigger than most other trees of that age. Oldest or most outstanding specimen, historic significance, and we'll get more into this one, but that's really looking at association with early settlers or region of a historic event. Asante and I have actually had some great conversations with the Snoqualmie tribe that we'll get into around culturally modified trees. I think we are really missing that kind of indigenous perspective in terms of the historic category. So I think that would be a pretty easy one to update and include without having to maybe create a brand new category, but certainly was not included when this was created 20 or so years ago. And then ecological value, a tree that provides special benefit ecologically, maybe not seen elsewhere in the community here in Issaquah. So there's kind of a description, one thing we'll call it in a few slides too, it's kind of hard to see, but the third column over from the left, the second paragraph from the bottom, it says, in order to keep the process competitive, there will be no limitation on the number of trees nominated. However, the maximum number of trees selected will be limited to 3. So that's something to think about too, if that's something that seems appropriate to keep. And then this was a pretty standard timeframes, it sounds like, where trees were nominated, reviewed, and approved or denied in September by the park board. So that's something that Brad talked about, having some more lead time, potentially being really valuable for that, possibly having some assessments of the trees. We don't want to nominate a tree if it's in severe decline, and we want to approve a tree if no one knows that. So maybe some steps to give the park board a little more lead time to kind of review and understand the nomination. It sounds like in the past, these kind of came in at the wire and you kind of had to decide on the fly there. And whether we need a set time frame or if there could be rolling nominations, these are the things we're trying to kind of consider. So kind of getting into the categories, kind of reviewed these already, but this is a nice graphic our interns, Mina and Leilani, put together. So I think I can kind of jump over these, but this is, I guess could have used the slide, a little bit more readable version of the form we had copied on the last slide. So our existing categories, theoretically we could add to that. I don't know if that'd be something that would need to be then updated in our code, Jeff, because right now these are the 3 categories identified. I think we could do our best to modify or include sort of new approaches or interpretations of these categories, as I kind of already mentioned around the historic category, but right now this is what we have. And really kind of get into goals. Very simply, we'd like to start adding new trees and really celebrating, recognizing, educating about our unique trees. And there's already several more that I have in my head that I think would be really cool for this program. So I think that's certainly the goal, to have this updated, have a new process, and then really look at getting trees nominated in 2024. There's definitely a lot of questions around tree protection. What does it mean to have heritage tree nomination or heritage tree selection status in our tree code? And then there is, essentially prohibited to remove heritage trees with some exceptions around hazard, nuisance trees, installing solar. There's a few interesting things in our city code that do allow for the removal of heritage trees, but it does add a little bit extra layer of protection. And there's some questions on, is that uniformly enforced on public and private? Does that discourage private residents from submitting a tree like this? So that's stuff that Brad and Andrew and I talked about a little bit too in a meeting a couple weeks ago. Process of nomination, we've already kind of talked about, but really trying to update that from basic things like having electronic submittal to, timing, number of trees, things like that. And we'll get into the next slide here on some of the possible modifications to the categories too. Walking tours, I think that could be more broadly education, but this is something I know our interns is really interesting in having essentially a guided and, a self-guided walking tour of our heritage trees, which Chris would tie into some of the mapping, public, available mapping needs. So we do have these mapped internally right now. They're not available to the public. But that's definitely a goal as we refresh and kind of restart this program. So a few things to just kind of think about, a few questions at the bottom of each of these is Grove nominations. Our interns did great work, kind of working with them, looking at neighboring cities and some of the other categories they might have that we're missing. And if you look at Seattle, Puyallup, there's I'm sure a couple other cities, they have groves where they're looking at, kind of patches of tree. Some of you might remember we had this really cool redwood planting project that was clones of some of the biggest, oldest redwoods in California, and that's actually planted at the Park Point groves. So right now, those trees aren't huge, but as a collection and that historic significance, seems like a really neat opportunity to nominate as a grove versus, 8 individual trees. So that's something, that we are, kind of asking whether groves of trees should be considered, and how that process would work compared to individual trees. Obviously some website updates, to make that more accessible and engaging and for opportunities for people to actually go out there. We talked with Brad briefly about signage without having sign overkill, but what maybe small little signs with just a species identification and a QR code that would lead to the website where you could look at the broader map of trees. So things like that are definitely improvements we can make to make this program hopefully a little bit more engaging and people maybe wanting to participate a bit more. And then we'll have one more slide on this, but if people aren't familiar, culturally modified trees, CMTs is the acronym there. We have a slide getting into this a little bit more here, but just asking if this is something that we should include in the historic category for heritage tree nominations. CMTs, culturally modified trees, or trees modified by indigenous people as part of their traditions. They are often sacred memorials, living archaeology, and this could be added under the umbrella of heritage trees. You can see some western red cedar there where actually bark was stripped. Can't tell you what that was used for, but that's used for almost, just a huge amount of products and our cultural, including even our troll that was cedar bark that was woven by a Snoqualmie tribe member and artist, the hair tie on the wrists. So really, you see stuff like this, and actually it's really neat. The Snoqualmie tribe actually has a grant that I think would train municipal foresters like myself to better identify these. I think the big question with CMTs, I don't want to speak for everyone here, I think there's a lot of interest to include them, but how does that look in terms of publicizing or advertising them when these are sacred and we don't necessarily want to love them to death or come out and trample the root zones, so I think there's questions on, what this actually looks like in terms of documentation. And that's a conversation we're going to continue with some of the Snoqualmie tribe members and staff. So that is kind of a quick overview, hopefully. And, as mentioned, next steps is really to solicit feedback from you all. We presented this to the environmental board as well, and, really kind of make some recommendations based on that feedback. And I think ultimately that would be voted on by this board to approve and move forward with those or modify those recommendations. So, as you can see, we have a lot. That's the cemetery at Hillside. Anyway, we can click through these, but weeping willows at Pickering, big leaf maple at Pickering. So yeah, a lot of these different heritage trees across our city. Oregon white oak at the kind of near the fish hatchery there. So I will spare you about 10 more slides, but they're there in your packet, or we can share them if people want to see the photos too. So yeah, I can. If it would be helpful to go back to the slide that had some specific questions or any just general feedback or thoughts. This is the one where we had a few questions at the bottom of each of those sections.
I have some thoughts. I love this idea in this program, and it's kind of hard for me to say the things I'm going to say right now, but I think we need to do a really deep dive in the criteria that we apply to this and how Park Board would then use those criteria to make a recommendation. I don't know that Park Board should really have the final approval of this. There's some bigger implications. I mean, I think it's great to have these trees, but a heritage tree could at some point be viewed as an encumbrance on a property, public or private, and I think that has to be taken into consideration, just out of respect for the people that own the property, whether it's an individual or city. And I think that ties into, one of the comments that we received is like, how do you do this? What if it's on public property? And then how would we, or the Park Board of the future decide, wow, that's a really cool tree. Everybody votes yes. Or is there really defined criteria to help make that decision and then the recommendation? Because we really got to think about, for example, Tibbetts, all those trees, they're beautiful, could be a perfect example of a grove, but there's a lot of competing needs there. And I think we're going to need some real filtered criteria to apply to this.
This is referring to a grove of London plane trees that kind of form the perimeter. Okay, people are familiar.
Can I add to that too? So let's say, Chris owned a home and his tree, we voted as a heritage tree. Chris then wants to move out of state, so his house to Katy. Now I'm now a new owner of this house and I want to get rid of this heritage tree because I have other needs for my home. But now it's been labeled as heritage tree, but it's on my private land. What can I do? I mean, am I going to be able just to cut it down because it's on my land? Or will the city come in and say, no, it's on your private land, but it's a heritage tree? So those are the
And
kind of.
people's needs change sometimes in ways that they don't anticipate.
All really, both are great comments and ones that we want to really take a deep dive into and again, realize, and again, other cities wrestle with this, right? So as Dan said, there are other heritage tree programs throughout, and let's learn from them. And let's understand, I think the intent and goal of the heritage tree program is to celebrate the tree, celebrate the history of the tree. The intent of the heritage tree program is not to become a encumbrance to development or change or unknown. So yeah, how do we inform and really create a meaningful program that feels like it's inviting nominations more than just a staff person, but also giving us really good criteria, one in just an initial evaluation that's bringing forward to the board, and then you're absolutely right, criteria that the board can help really decide. Dan and I have even talked about, are there examples out there that are there tiers of heritage trees that can be considered, and again, understand so many of the dynamics often at play. And I'm just thinking of public property, right? Those London plane trees are a great example. One of the probably the best, though perfectly planted on both the park property and in the right of way. It really represents a wonderful street tree canopy, one of our best street tree canopies. But there are some really important hard decisions that are going to need to be made about that in terms of what are the plans and needs and goals that this community has for the park? What are the plans and needs this community has for that right of way? We as the Parks Department are probably not the sole decision makers in that. The park board is not the sole decision maker in that. We want to create a heritage tree program that allows us to be really transparent and honest about those kind of conversations and not feel like we have to sneak around that really important but hard work.
And do we know when those discussions will be in place for those London plane trees? And when will the decision be made to?
No date has been set. That I think that the conversation about those trees is conversation when we're talking about future master planning for the park, when there's conversation about that Public Works is having about Newport and what to do. So
it's sometime in the future.
Sometime in the future, yeah. No date set, but I think it's clearly recognized and clearly understood by many. I can speak for myself and the Parks Department that how we work with those London plane trees needs to be part of and factored into any and all decisions about the park and about the right of way. But I think, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the question you're posing is, I'll pose it in my words. There are so many factors, and that is a great example, those London plane trees. Should those London plane trees be the driver of a lot of really important public decisions about both the right-of-way and the park? Or should they be a key factor, but should they be the sole decision maker? I pose it as a question. And
I support personally as one member of park board, I support the Heritage Tree Program, and I think it's important to have it. I think it's going to require pretty deliberate process to come up with the criteria. And I think for public property, I can't see that it would make sense that the park board would actually make a determination. I think the park board might make a recommendation. We'll see, but that would be us, an advisory board, saying these trees are now this, and that has some impact on the value of taxpayer owned land or something like that. And then I think for the private one, it's a little simpler because at least the signature is required at first. The
property owner needs to even say, yes, this is okay. This is okay to even consider. Yeah.
But as needs change, as people age, and I'm just using an example here, I'm making it up based on someone I know, that someone becomes elderly, their need for care increases, their need for more money increases. Suddenly they're going to look at their property and that tree maybe differently. So
I'm going to put out on the table. Yeah.
We would, a park board, not just we, but would need good, clear criteria for decision making.
All of this is such good discussion, and I think really emphasizes the need and the opportunity we have to take this deep. The need to update this program and really try and look at all of these factors. Yes, the new the development code has informed this work and what the Heritage Tree Program is right now. But I think the work of what we want this Heritage Tree Program to be, I guess, cuts both ways, right? That if there are recommendations and discussions, not only by this board, but by the environmental board, that will need to require consideration of that development code to make sure it aligns with whatever this new heritage tree or updated revised heritage tree program is. That'll be an important step in this future process. Thoughts, comments, others? I know Brad, Andrew, you guys did a lot of really good work with Dan, getting to look at this. Certainly more work to happen and occur.
Yeah, keep in mind that the park board isn't making the final determination. The park board is just making a recommendation. I mean, it's really the mayor that makes the final commitment to this. And so I think, as Jeff pointed out, there's going to be, maybe the environmental board should play a role at this point. I totally agree with Chris about having maybe some more established criteria that maybe hasn't been used in this program in the past. I was only involved in this for a couple years before it kind of faded out in my early involvement with the board, and it was pretty fast and furious. Here's a couple trees, looks good, okay, we recommend it. I mean, that's really what happened. And so, I'm glad we're actually getting down to a little more nitty gritty here moving forward.
Really being intentional. Yep.
Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
Okay, I'm not sure if we're kind of throwing out ideas at all for like the nomination process, but I think in terms of what should be weighted most heavily, I suppose would be trees that kind of seem to be sequestering most carbon or are native, or perhaps like most like xeric species in terms of like greater chance of survival. I did notice a lot of the trees that are currently on there seem to be not necessarily invasive, but exotic species. But in any case, that's just my thought.
Great point.
No, thank you, Zach. And that's something, Brad, we talked about briefly. It's a mix. We have a lot of Douglas fir in there. So there's certainly other native species that maybe don't grow as big, but still quite the unique specimens in Issaquah here. But then, yeah, we do have, I certainly don't have any invasive species or noxious weeds on there, but, non-native species that are appropriate for this climate. So, I think that's generally a kind of mix in these heritage tree programs, but definitely appreciate that feedback. And something we'll kind of weigh there is, are we targeting more species diversity, or does it become just purely kind of a big tree program, which, kind of would correlate a little bit more with the carbon sequestration. But I think those are things we're certainly trying to weigh. So appreciate your feedback there.
Well, not the end of the conversation, definitely still at the beginning, and we'll have another ad hoc committee meeting between now and the next time this comes back to the board. Yeah.
Thoughts on timing, Dan, on this one? Is it kind of works in parallel with the urban forest management plan? I mean, these two kind of help one another a little bit?
I think so, and I think getting the ad hoc team together and I think it's maybe on me and can work with our interns a little bit on what maybe some more specific criteria that we could actually propose, kind of bring it at the ad hoc team and then the broader board. So maybe it's something we can try to do something like that here in the next month or so, and then look at, January, February meeting to kind of bring it back to the broader board here with maybe some actual, a little bit more concrete recommendations. On the criteria, and then some of the maybe more simple steps around adding, a few things to these categories and just kind of how we're actually going to publicize and document this program publicly. So,
well, I really thank you for jumping in, kicking this off, sort of starting this first conversation with not only ad hoc group but park board. It's, I think, like many have said, this has been overdue to really look at this and have this more than just be a check the box. Staff-driven kind of process. Let's really make this feel like it's something that is understood, that's relevant, that's intentional with both staff on public property, but even a little bit more privately informed and really educating about trees. Is your hand up again, Zach, or is that it's the old tired hand? Right? I'm not the only one who does that. That's good to know. So thank you, Dan. Yeah.
Yes, we'll see you more in the new year, but thank you all.
Our next item, Dan doesn't have to present.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thanks all.
All right, next topic. We're continuing.
Next plan update.
Next plan update is the park system plan update. We did go over classifications during our last meeting, and since then we've kind of put those to the test as we've gone through our existing park system and reclassified, kind of reorganized and took a look at those. Very valid feedback and input, made us really think about how we want to define those classifications even more and leave more flexibility in them, and really see what the function of that, the primary function of that classification is. And I'll kind of give a little bit of a recap coming up, but okay. So really tonight we want to look at our goals and priorities. We know this is coming up with a comprehensive plan also, so we want to make sure that we're aligning with those and that we get our suggestions and recommendations in there sooner than later. The good news is that the survey is open and out in the public now, so please take a look at that. We have the link right there, and we're starting to get that on social media and get that out. We've had 86 replies so far. We're shooting for 400 to 500 is our goal right now. So please get the word out. Take the survey yourself. But tonight we really want to focus on goals and priorities. And in my mind, goals are the most important thing. We'll come back again and look at priorities once we've established and kind of reset those goals. So yeah, we'll look at the recap of the park classifications. We'll review the 2018, 2019 goals to see what's still relevant, where did we succeed? And I think Jeff has a little input on that for tonight. What shift in the goals need to happen? What goals do we really need to prioritize? I think that's really important too for the next two discussions. And then for the policies, which we can highlight tonight, but probably dig into maybe in the next meeting. Again, what policies are still relevant in 2024? We just heard about the urban forest management plan. Is that going to start adjusting some of our priorities, and how do we incorporate these new plans into them? And then what policies really need to be updated based on the current trends and communities that we have right now? Again, I think once we get results back in from the survey, that may tweak a few priorities as well. And we'll see what the community's needs are lately.
Great.
Okay.
It's updating here, not there.
Okay. So again, just kind of a recap on park classifications, the criteria we are assessing, acreage, we talked about acreage and trying not to bind us into real specific acreages, but leaving that a little more flexible. Is a primary use active or passive use? What amenities? Access into the park? Is it neighborhood or community, more community involved? Definitely landscape and environment is a big consideration. Stewardship of our natural open space, and how does that classification really fit within the Green Necklace Network as we start redefining and start tightening up what is that Green Necklace. So the park classifications we have right now, the new ones are, we still have community parks, we still have neighborhood parks, resource parks, we switched to nature parks because the primary focus is more ecological. We still have our open space, undeveloped parks, and two new ones were the greenways and the linear parks, which we realized from feedback, we still need to tighten that description up and that definition up a little bit more. So kind of the general feedback and overarching feedback was really great. We love the input. Will park naming conventions include the classification? And this is something Jeff and I have been talking about. I think it's really, really important, really critical to start including those in there so people can recognize the different types of parks that we have. How strict are the percentage of active recreation in each classification? And that again goes along with even acreage. How strict are we going to be? How fluid can we be? How fluid should we be on both of those? And I think that needs to be more flexible, considering just when we're taking into topography, amenities, site characteristics, it does need to be more flexible. Look at the gaps of acreages and classifications. We'll review those and allow for the flexibility in classifications to better align with the park function. So great feedback. We're putting those into play right now and really testing those out. Okay, so trying something new with goals. So I really want to make a distinction between what goals are and what policies are. They are two different things. So our goals are more higher overarching ideas. They provide a basis for a community to make decisions about implementation, preservation, funding, and management. And there are really general statements of desired outcomes of the park system plan, very high level. Where policies kind of dig into those goals a little bit more. They're general rules for action focused on a specific issue in a park system plan goal. And they can be operational actions that a community will undertake to meet the goals. So really combining the two of those really equals our community values and what we want out of the park system. So looking at the 2018, 2019 goals and policies, we really had 8 goals established that I want to review tonight with you, see what's still applicable, see what we need to change. And I did shift one of the slides up as we're talking through. We're going to go through each goal in a little more detail, but what out of the 2018-19 goals are still pertinent now in 2024? What shifts are we seeing in the community that may cause us to restructure or identify new goals and policies? What are the priority goals and policies in the next 6 years? Again, this is a 6-year plan. So what do we want to really focus on in the next 6 years? What are we doing well? You know, we've had a lot of little upsets, I guess you could say, or challenges that have come up in the past since the 2018 plan. But it feels like we were able to accomplish quite a few things under those challenges. What do we need to improve on? And again, that kind of goes back into the policies. What do we need to tweak that we need to improve? Do the new park classifications impact the goals and policies? Again, now we have greenways and we have linear parks. How does that get integrated back in, and what policies do we need to look at and tweak based on those? So kind of the line items on the right are from the 2018, 2019, that we'll just start with those as a basis, and go through those in more detail one by one. So goal A was parks for today and future generations, to build on the legacy of Issaquah's existing park recreation trail and open space system for the community for today and future generations. And I kind of simplified each policy on the right-hand side. But I figure as we go through each one, we can just discuss that goal, see if it's still relevant, see if it's still applicable, see what we potentially want to tweak in that policy. So policy A1 was anticipate growth and opportunities, reinvest in our current parks, trails, and open spaces, respond to recreation needs and trends, acquire suitable park, trail, open space, and natural resource lands, identify potential park expansion opportunities, and maximize athletic field capacity. So kind of based on what we're seeing and what trends we're seeing and feedback we're getting from the community. And again, once the survey comes in, we'll reassess that and look at this again. But do you feel that this goal is still pertinent for the new plan? Yeah, good one. Okay.
Sounds like a good start. This one's foundational.
Yeah.
Let's think about today and the future.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you want to dig into each policy and kind of review it, I think we sent out some more detailed descriptions, so we can kind of just do a higher look at the policies and dig into them next time, if you want. Or do you want to open up discussion on this one right now? Overall, thumbs up. Thumbs up. Okay. That's easy. We'll keep this one. Goal A, stay. Okay, goal B, a balanced park system. To provide a balanced park system by blending active and passive experiences and providing equitable opportunities for the diverse needs and interests of Issaquah residents. So we're striving to, in the policies, we strive to balance passive and active recreational opportunities. And I know, just based on land constraints, that can get a little bit more difficult, but I think that's a really necessary need that we have right now. Provide multi-use active recreational opportunities, meet the community's diverse needs, and encourage healthy living. Quality of life is a big attraction for the city and for the residents, and pulling new people in. Providing universal access. And I know this comes up more and more often. I know we're revamping the ADA ramps right now. And then how does that really kind of does tie into some park updates as well. And provide a wide variety of recreational and park experiences. So do you feel that this is a goal that we want to continue on with and emphasize and really dig into?
I have a question on this one, and whatever the answer is great. But I think it's not addressed in any of the slides, but is there any part of, I'm just going to call it Plan B, balanced park system, more specifically the equitable opportunities for the diverse needs, interests of Issaquah residents? Is there's any interest, desire, concern, hope that not only it's just Issaquah residents, but it's to provide opportunity for growth of our park system by making things that people from other cities would want to come and participate in?
I think that's important. I think when we're looking at partnerships as well, what are we gonna offer and what do we need that balances between the city or state parks?
Great question. Yeah, I think, the intent of this goal was, I know, a show of hands, I know some of the park board members who are here that helped us sort of reframe these goals. I think this wasn't meant to be an exclusive statement, meaning it's only Issaquah residents, but it's really more of a focused goal of, hey, we're really tasked with creating a system that supports Issaquah residents. Clearly, we invite and want visitors, right? And we know there'll be other users of our park system, but maybe, again, good open discussion to say, do we want to add something about, and visitors to this goal?
Yeah, I mean, my only follow-up would be just that I fully understand that it's the city of Issaquah residents that pay the taxes that are like supporting a lot of this. And so I'm not saying otherwise. I was thinking about experiences of other park systems that specifically create, for example, turf fields, so they can play sports year round and generate the city more revenue. Because, for example, like Tibbetts right now, all the fields are blocked off because they're too muddy. And all the soccer is compressed into one field, so all the rest don't get damaged. So it's like, as we're looking at our goals and plans, that's the only thing. I don't think it needs to be added. I just was in the general. I think you might have said when you get to the partners and stuff like that.
Visitors. I mean, when you're talking about visitors and maybe economic vitality or something like that, and not just fields, but look at the control.
Yeah.
And the impact that has had. So.
And how we think of trailheads and how many visitors come and sort of use downtown as its gateway up. And it's.
And I'll make a push for the Issaquah Bowls pool to get that touch pad in. Other cities, can come and do competition. And the city can make money.
Yeah, really, really good. Great. I love the discussion. And I think a plug and maybe a little bit of question as we're continuing to go through these goals. The classifications are going to shed, I think, a realistic light on something we've talked about as a group, and I think as staff, we really want this 24 plan to take that honest look in the mirror. We are a land-constrained town. We're a very land-constrained park system right now. These goals about multi-use, right? That's really, really important. We're going to have to maximize the land we have, right? Things like synthetic turf fields, right? That's not just boy, those are nice to have. It's like those create more capacity on top of one another, right? That multi-use is so important. And so I think that, as we're thinking through and talking through these goals, we're just recognizing that reality of who we are, right? And yes, we realize we're going to be serving not only residents and visitors, but we're probably also not a city park system that's going to create a 8-plex tournament grade baseball, right? We're just not, right? Though no matter how much we'd love to, but man, we can create a great series and system of athletic fields that serve our residents' needs and also can be creatively used for tournaments if we're really, really smart, right? So it's sort of that aspirational goals and policies, but man, we need to be really pragmatic to the very thing we love about this town, and all the trees and all the hills make us pretty land constrained. Yeah.
Just for the record, I want to make sure I understood I'm not pushing for synthetic fields.
Thank you. I added that. All right.
All right, so I think that's a really good addition to the policies to look at next time and really incorporate the idea and the flexibility and bringing in economic development into this goal.
Visitation.
Yeah. Okay, I know.
Maybe I know I don't need to go this far. I want to make sure that's kind of what I was thinking about more of is like people go to a disc golf course and after they're done, they go have a beer at a brewery and then they pay to park. Because that's kind of more like the economic like side of it. I'm saying is like, as we're thinking about creating our new parks or, you know, reevaluating in our goals, as long as it's just understood somewhere, it doesn't need to be in writing on goal B, but just that that's a benefit. That's all.
It helps drive it's an economic tool. The park system is, yeah.
For sure. Okay, goal C, connectivity. Connect parks, neighborhoods, business districts, schools, and other activity areas together through an integrated system of trails and open spaces. And again, quite a few policies related to this. You know, just a real focus on trail access, connectivity between the trails, between the parks. Again, that partnership and working locally with regional partners to complete the system where feasible. Provide secondary connections, compelling north-south off-road valley trail network. And I think all of these kind of really tie back into the green necklace idea. And how is this connectivity pulling together? How are we developing this? What does that green necklace really look like? And how are we defining that?
Seems really relevant still.
That is very.
I have a hunch our survey responses are gonna, trail interest and trail connectivity will probably be
Very much so.
big, And back to the classifications, why you know, we really, as Robin and I and the staff team have talked about it and your feedback, you know, having a couple of more linear trail or linear park classifications and recognizing linear parks, recognizing greenways for what they are and the role they're going to really need to play and will play in connectivity is a way that classifications can really better align with our goals and policies. Is the intent.
Mm-hmm. And how do we start integrating into more urban areas? And that's where the linear park concept really can come into play. I think everyone feel pretty good about connectivity still? Okay, great. That's a keeper. Okay, so planning and design considerations. Master plan major parks, trails, open space, and facilities, and engage the community in designing them, which I think is a really important facet to that one. Ensure that parks are designed utilizing a thoughtful planning process. Preserve and orient recreational facilities, amenities designed to serve the local neighborhood. I think not only local neighborhood, but when we're looking at community parks, serving it community-wide. And again, very good amenities expected to draw users from multiple neighborhoods or community-wide, or does that expand again if we're looking at economical development? Does it go even further?
This could be another place to tie in that.
Exactly. So I think that's a really good point. And proposed amenities not already identified. I think a lot of that might come out of the survey. What are we missing? What are we spot on? What do we need more of? And to monitor potential amenity improvements. And I think that goes back to master planning and starting to set these parks up for future master planning based on the needs we see coming up.
Good question on D6. Can you give me an example of what an asset is? I know an amenities, I assume a bathroom, a restroom.
Yeah, trails, benches. Is it going to have maybe a pavilion or a gazebo there? That's what I'm thinking of as far as assets go. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the way I read that, again, that's maybe me, is just like, oh, we have this natural open space. We're going to plunk some things down into it.
Right.
So it's like.
And that's,
No, and the policy itself, the policy language gives a little bit more of a description. And this is sort of the heading.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not a forced plopping, it's a, right. And I think the intent of this goal is to really say, let's be thoughtful and let's engage the community. This is you all as residents, this is your park system. And we're just trying to, let's commit to stewarding this along with you.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of ties, again, it all ties back into the classifications and how we're really defining that. And maybe that specific asset pushes it up into another classification. So again, I think being flexible or tying those down a little bit more will help us define those. All right, everyone feel pretty comfortable leaving this one in? Okay. Okay, and then continue there. Yeah, there were a lot of policies related to this one. So, you know, planning and design considerations kind of is a overarching umbrella for quite a few things. But again, policies, design natural and creative play, encourage signage and wayfinding is a big part of it. Strategically locating those signs, signage to be consistent, which I know we're working on that right now. And then trails within the creek corridor and mountains to sound trail.
Again, what those
So-
planning and design considerations are. For those park board members that were here when we updated the goals and policies last time, you might remember the goals and policies had ideas of community engagement sort of plopped all over them. And Chris, I think you were involved in the subcommittee, and we said, let's consolidate all these engagement goals into one goal.
Yeah, it was kind of a big mess before we
Yeah. Did a pretty good,
reorganized
really
it
good
all.
reorg, yep.
Oh, Brad.
So this, we had actually talked about this a little bit in the last meeting. This might actually be the proper goal to maybe add in public art as a policy to consider.
No, great idea.
That art,
Yeah.
right, art and culture should be an element of our planning and design considerations.
Right, right.
Yeah, yep.
And that can be brought in at the design level, having artists involved in the park design itself, or it could be an additional component or asset, so to speak, of the park. So I think there's multiple ways we can do that and start incorporating more and more of it. And I like the idea someone brought up that art can be flexible enough to be moved around to different parks as well. So everybody gets a chance to see those pieces. They're not just dedicated to one park and one park only.
It's a great thought, Brad. Thoughts from the group, would you agree? Placing, art and storytelling, art and culture as a.
Cultural significance.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
Art and education. So yeah.
All of that.
Yeah. Very much placemaking components there.
Specifically calling out that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's a good
Great.
one.
Well, and working with this artist that I have over the few years and doing some of this, he has mentioned frequently in some of his projects that it really makes a huge difference to actually get that involved in the early planning and design phase rather than to bring it in later.
Exactly.
Not only for cost reasons, but just also that, it incorporates that into the project better when it's working in conjunction with the other phases of planning and design, rather than to just, a lot of times what happens, you get a park done and it's all done, and then all of a sudden you plop in something later on and it doesn't necessarily fit as well. So.
Right. Really, it can integrate with the theme of the park itself, enhance it, or yeah.
Right.
Brad, you're referring to Don Fells?
I am, yes, right.
Yeah, so just so everyone knows, Don Fells was hired by the Arts Commission to do, as we were doing sort of the anchor park work. So really looking at the Issaquah Creek corridor, looking at Tibbetts Valley Park, looking at that sort of consolidated Veterans Memorial Park that we're now doing the ARPA project on. That early work, we brought in Don to help tell the story and incorporate need. This is a great example of this, Brad, because I think as you've all seen, design of pedestrian park and the senior center plaza, there's storytelling that we're trying to weave into the entirety of the design, not just plopping up a piece of art at the tail end of it. So yeah, really, really good example.
Great. So it sounds like this is another goal we want to continue on with and probably enhance then with the art
With that
aspect.
art piece, art and culture, yeah.
Okay. So goal E is kind of near and dear to everybody's hearts, I think, is the environmental preservation, which kind of ties back into the urban forest management as well. To preserve and enhance and protect a coordinated system of parks and public open spaces, to preserve the city's natural character, sustain its urban forest resources, and enhance its natural systems, wildlife habitat, and corridors as a legacy for future generations. And I think that's something we've really established and started on and really want to continue on and enhance. So policies preserve and protect, management and implementation, balance, bring visual relief and tranquility, promote retention and replication, and preserve the quality of surrounding scenic and visual resources. And like Jeff said, I think coming up, because we are land constrained, this is going to become a critical pathway and a good discussion point in future park planning.
Just a general thought and an add, Robin, this might be an opportunity within either one of the current policies or a new policy to make reference now that we'll have an urban forest management plan. Now that you're right, we'll update a heritage street program or whatever that looks like. This could be a nice intersection point to have goals and policies of this plan to speak to some of that work.
Especially the idea of the groves, which is going to take up.
Maybe something about the wildlife.
Yes.
Yep.
We're talking a lot of trees, but we're not mentioning wildlife.
All right.
Goal worth keeping.
Goal worth keeping.
Pretty obvious, right?
All right, maintenance and stewardship to ensure system stewardship and sustainability through effective maintenance and resource management practices. So effectively manage open space and natural resource lands, utilize BMP's best management practices, protect our parklands, stewardship, implement and uphold existing open space stewardship plans, ensure facilities are safe and well managed, and proactively address user security and safety, and perform routine inspections.
Taking care of what we got.
Take good care of it, keep it.
Can I make a little bit of a brag, and even a brag to you all as the park board? This 2018 plan has done a lot. I know we had a global pandemic. I know we have park capital projects that are clearly, because of engagement and permitting, take a little bit longer, but this plan really set into motion so much of what we've done. The increased level of service standards, a park operations and park maintenance team that is so better equipped and is, I think, showing terrific work. This plan had an operational goal for a crazy thing like green Issaquah and urban forest management, right? It's set into motion so much that we're now seeing the fruits of. And so just, this idea of maintenance and stewardship being such a good goal, all these goals really help to create some actions and a vision that have really directed and resulted in a lot of really, really good work. Some key acquisitions that have happened, the Bergsma property, the Squaw Mountain Estates property, a property that we partnered with DNR to better improve Tiger Mountain. Really, all three of our Alps now have better connections because of, again, thoughtful goals and policies, thoughtful adoption of the 2018 plan. So I hope as we unveil the 2024 park plan update, we'll spend some time and really dive in and show how this 2018 plan really informed and produced some results these last 6 years. So I'll get up my soapbox now.
That's good.
It's kudos to
Yes.
Again, your great work as a board as well.
Right. So I think this is one we also want to keep and enhance. Great. Good. Okay, partnerships. Foster partnerships with local, regional, state, and federal agencies to support Issaquah's park system. Embrace local partnerships with the public sector, nonprofits, businesses, developers, and various user groups, and interdepartmental partnerships to provide and assist in the management and maintenance of a complex park system. So some of those policies are partner with the Issaquah school districts. We've heard this from an ad hoc group too. Again, it goes back to fields, and do we have enough fields? Where can we partner with other people or other cities? Where can we enhance and increase our own? Coordinate and cooperate with and partner with local, state, and federal agencies. We do see that a lot. or with DNR, again, in some of the state open spaces. Participate in cooperative regional planning efforts. Again, we're really involved with other municipalities, other agencies to see how we can collaborate and come together and enhance everybody's system. And again, that goes back to connectivity throughout the city. Encourage partnerships with neighborhoods and existing businesses. Promote partnerships with nonprofits, special interest and service organizations. Continue coordination, participation with specific interest groups. Developers are constantly coming up. How can we coordinate with them on enhancing the system? Developers may be required to provide public spaces and facilities. More and more, they're seeing the benefits of the assets and the return of investment in creating more park spaces in their developments. And developers shall mitigate to offset impacts of their new development, which again, they're seeing the value of that. So we're having more and more discussions with developers as new subdivisions come up.
You remember this, for again, those of you that are there, we added that last policy to really speak to park impact fees and the absolute important role that park impact fees play in new development.
And there's a few more policies continued, encouraging interdepartmental planning, communication, information. I have to say, this is one city where I've never seen so much communication between the departments. And integration and collaboration, and that's pretty spectacular, pretty special, and it gets everybody excited about the project. So kudos to the city for that. Coordinate collective planning efforts, again, going back and coordinating with the comprehensive plan and making sure we're integrated nicely with the plan and we're not butting heads or having conflicts. And policy, no change of use for the last policy. So, and I know with the ad hoc group, we did talk about partnerships. Again, trying to work with other municipalities and sharing some of that athletic field space. If one goes down, seeing who else is available and vice versa. Or partnering with the schools, the school districts a little bit more and seeing where we can mutually benefit in the field.
Brad has.
Oh, Brad.
Well, a little surprised. I don't see it, but I'm surprised we didn't put that in there. But this would be something to also include native tribes as a partner. I just don't know why it's not there. You could maybe interpret federal agencies wouldn't really even include it.
Right. Very good point.
Yep, really good. Yep.
Great point. Any other partnerships that you think we should be focusing on or part of the policies that we're not listing or not looking at yet?
We don't do much by ourselves.
Okay. The implementation. We really don't have a system plan update without tangible goals that can be implemented. So to execute the vision and plans in accordance with the park's strategic plan and measure the effectiveness and success of the comprehensive plan in achieving community visions, goals, and policies. So first policy, to ensure the comprehensive plan goals and policies are accompanied by actions and resources. Implementable, actionable projects identified in the strategic plan. So again, setting our priorities for the next 6 years. Create and implement a performance-based level of service policy. Employ sound fiscal management. Seek funding sources. And again, that could be widely interpreted. Several types of funding sources available. It's just a matter of going after them and seeing what aligns well with the project. Use impact fees to address the impacts of development and encourage citizen participation in the implementation. And again, that goes back to the park system when we're designing the parks and incorporating public and neighborhood feedback.
So as we look at this goal and finalize this goal, this is really the goal to say, you know what, let's not create something that sits on the shelf, right? Let's create something that ends up pretty dog-eared and informs the 6-year capital improvement plan. It informs, budget requests that we ask for. It's something that we're really doing everything we can to put into use.
It really strengthens our chances of going after grants and seeking extra funding if available. I think that was the last. Oh. Go back. Okay. How do we feel about implementation? Good. We need to have it for sure.
This is the rubber meets the road. Right.
Yeah.
Let's not just talk about it. Let's
Yeah.
go do it.
This is it.
So I do have a thought that I want to throw out here in here, we're talking about measuring and I'm wondering if there's something that we might want to start thinking about of how we're actually doing that measurement and how we're evaluating and adding in some sort of evaluation within this as one of our goals. Or within this goal and policies of how are we then showing what we've really implemented.
And implemented in terms of projects or programs or.
I was just gonna say quality
control.
I like that quality control. Yeah.
But also maybe looking back, just like in the current survey, what do you use? What do you like? Where do you think we've done good? Where do you think we need to improve or something like that?
Very much. And I think Jeff and I talk a lot about just the process and how that's changing. And with the code update, and the permits that we need to go through, knowing that with the land constraint, a lot of it could potentially be in critical areas. So how does that process look now? Realistic timeframes for that implementation, I think, need to be discussed and integrated in with that as well.
I think it's a great add to something. Yeah. How are we adding a metric to say what is the rate of capital project completion that we should be seeking to achieve? Where are we demonstrating this plan is informing our programmatic or service level asks when it comes to maintaining and stewarding the park system? Yep.
So it sounds like, thumbs up. We want to keep that and really expand and kind of maybe next time hone in on that policy a little bit more.
Measurement.
Yeah, a measurement goal on that. Okay.
It feels like the 8 goals really still resonate.
Right.
Foundational for some ads in terms of
arts and, really including the native tribal aspect to it. Is that something where you want to pull those two out as specific goals or make sure we're implementing those in the policies?
No, I think they fit well in the design categories already. They just need to be added.
Okay.
Added as policies.
Right.
Also the economic development, how is our park system serving as that sort of economic engine or, incubator? How many cups of coffee has Jacob Two Trees helped to sell?
Do we want to hit that ecotourism aspect where, we want to make sure it's sustainable tourism as well? I mean, so we're not really destroying the ecological benefit that we have here. How do we balance that?
We are going to be meeting with, as you've heard a couple times, Asante and Dan have had a chance to meet with the tribe. I've had a chance to meet with the tribe. We're going to be engaging with them multiple times, but pretty early on in this, the park system plan update, getting their thoughts and perspective on our goals and policies. And then later, as we head into next year and have drafts as well. So I think it was a great point, Brad, in terms of the partnership section, making sure we're speaking to those local partners as well at the tribes.
That intergovernmental.
Right.
And the intergovernmental piece to find it.
And putting that back into the planning and design of the parks as well. That's probably a policy that we make sure we do that every single time.
Well, and I might you know, I might extend that might be interested tribes, because there's actually 4 tribes that have interest in the Issaquah area, primarily the Snoqualmie, but they're not the only ones.
Right,
And Muckleshoot is pretty close behind, yeah.
right. I think it's a good point. And again, maybe that goes back into a metric too. So great. So it really looks like the goals are still pretty applicable.
I think that
Very much.
following implementation is evaluation. Is that covered?
That's a really good point.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Or then within implementation, sort of, I think what Hasanti was saying, how are we measuring? Right? How are we
I mean,
measuring?
we've got wonderful goals and we're striving, but in 5 years, are you gonna hold them up and say, boy, we did great? Or how do we know?
Yeah, how did this
Yeah,
inform?
we were left and you said we were going here.
Right. Right. And kind of go back to those survey results. You know, was that a true need? You know, did that project work? Again, back to the success of that and establishing those metrics too.
Really good.
I think,
So, go ahead.
I think the implementation goal as well may also link to, I didn't see a particular mention about investing in the technology, right? What we talked about in the heritage, the urban forest plan about having like GIS software, tree inventory, and so on. It's like, how can you support those metrics tracking without investment in technology and data analytic services, right? So I think that is one policy that can also be considered in that group.
That's a great add.
Right.
You're right.
That's
And
nice.
just even, you know, as in places we speak to best management practices or best standards, you know, making sure we have language that's talking about how we're utilizing technology.
Mhm.
Great point.
Mhm. And seeing all those GIS overlays and looking at different lenses, I think it's going to really inform acquisitions, you know, master planning, next steps, inform quite a bit. So I think that's a really important goal to include.
I'm also curious about, I think there's one about preservation, why we didn't mention the heritage tree program as a policy. Like we had varying levels of specificity in policies, right? So if we really want to commit to implementing a program, that is one thing that we also we can include policy itself.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
And along with
That environmental piece is the opportunity to, both
Right.
reference the heritage tree program and the urban forest planning effort going on now, yeah.
Right, and establish a policy that we hit maybe a certain goal of that urban forest management plan where feasible, and enhance that. No, that's a really good point.
Well, looking at time, I don't know if you want to hit on next, I know we have to hit our comprehensive plan update as well.
Right.
With a relatively quick turnaround.
Right. So to align with the comprehensive plan, they'd like recommendations. They wanted a final set of goals and policies, but I think we can have a pretty solid draft to them. So coming up in November, we'll really dig into those policies. I'll add in this information. We'll review that one more time and then make a decision on that, a recommendation on that for November's meeting.
Yeah, so the thought is to have goals and policies back to you all to look at as in a draft form in November. Those goals and policies, if you remember our timeline, would then inform our park system plan update process, but then also to branch off into another tree and go into the comprehensive plan update. So our goals and policies are one and the same in both the comp plan and our park plan. So back to you all in November to achieve that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks,
Good discussion. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
that's everything for regular business, right?
There it is.
Yeah, that's it.
Reports.
Reports. Jeff, do you want to fire away?
You sure you want me to go first?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, happy to. Couple really quick updates. Next Sunday, October 29th, we have a newly sort of shaped community event happening. It's called Boo at the Barn. So at the Pickering Barn from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., actually from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. We'll be inviting the community to come do a variety of fun activities at the barn, from kids activities to a haunted trail for those that like to be scared out of their wits a little bit. You might recall at the community center before the pandemic, we had a fall harvest festival. This is sort of bringing that event back in a newly formed way, utilizing the barn for what it really is as a fun place for a community event. So look forward to seeing how that happens. Hats off to our recreation team. Hats off to our new adaptive recreation team. The first hour of this event from 4 to 5 is going to be, I'm going to say this right, sort of a low sensory hour for those that want to come and experience the event in that way. So great work by our recreation team planning that. Couple of signs that you're going to see out on the street. We talked a little bit about working with our partners at the Snoqualmie Tribe. They have had an ancestral lands movement. You may have seen these signs at our trailheads in places. We're going to be putting a new set of these out. Alex Anderson, our park ranger, works with the tribe in getting these out. But it's just a great way of us at our trailheads reminding all of our park users to respect the land, restore the land, and recognize really these public lands are not just ours to utilize now in the present, but these have a really rich history. Another sign you're going to be seeing out in our trail system and parks is inviting residents to take part in our park system plan survey. You might recall we had focus group discussions this summer. Sort of our next wave of engagement is the survey, which is out now. We'll be going on through the middle of November. QR code directs individuals straight to the survey. You may recall, as we've done engagement efforts through the pandemic, we utilized QR codes and signs along our trails and parks to huge success. We had better response than we'd ever had before, and so we look forward to getting community response to that public survey. We're also sending out the survey news to many of our user groups, our recreational user databases, our athletic field databases. So by mid-November, we should have some really good survey response that's going to really inform sort of our next set of that park system update. And given time, that's enough from me. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just a couple things. So you can go to Boo at the Barn, and in the same evening, go to the Issaquah Historical Museum is putting on some cemetery tours, Saturday the 28th and Sunday the 29th in the evening. Those will be guided. There's a link on their website. And then I won't go into them all, but I did finally get my my act together. And there are a number of partner events, like trailhead improvement, planting events and such. Issaquah House and Trails Club has on their website. Encourage you to go look at those. And then Green Issaquah also has some on their calendar, so a little bit more. And then last, I guess, State Park Free Day is November 11th.
Take advantage of that.
There are two other items on that we want to check on. I think next time we can touch on it, but the work plan and how we really ought to be checking in on it maybe a little more frequently as an entity. And so maybe we talk about that. So next time that'll be a topic. Traditionally or historically, we have not had a December meeting. It's a little hard to get one in on the fourth Thursday of December.
A little busy that day.
So that will probably not happen. And that's everything I have. Any other business anyone have?
I have one item to that, Chris. Thank you. You're absolutely right. The 2024 work plan, we as a department begin working on now that we're in the fourth quarter, really starting to map out specifically our 2024 work plan. So thank you, Chris. We'll be working with certainly Chris's chair and beginning to look at department work plan really helps to inform park board work plan. Would love that discussion in November in terms of beginning to really map out topics and information here next year.
Anyone have any other business? Very good. Our next meeting, sorry.
November 27th. It's the Monday after Thanksgiving break. So I will try and remember to send lots and lots of reminders and for myself as well.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll be here and sleepy.
Exactly. Turkey and gravy leftovers will be in the kitchen.
I think with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you everyone for staying late.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Lots of topics tonight. Thanks.